going to be a tutorial about analyzing and defining, making sure that you know how and when to label the medical terms that we're discussing in every chapter from now on. So I want to start by pointing out, and some of you may already have this down perfectly, but I know from looking at assignments that many of you are confused about different word parts. So I want to go through them all. There are 4 word parts. The first one is a word root. It has a star here because it is the most important part of a medical term, is the word root. And I liken it to, think of a tree, okay? A tree cannot survive without roots in the soil. Same thing, a medical term cannot be built without a word root. It's the single most important term in the word. It's abbreviated by WR. So when you go to analyze it and I tell you to label, you're going to label the word root as WR. Combining vowel is the second word part. The combining vowel, which is abbreviated CV, is always going to be, 99% of the time, and I will alert you to whenever it's not, and you'll see it in PowerPoints, it's going to be an O. And that O you see on certain pages in your books as a word root plus a combining vowel gives you the combining form. In other words, you might see something like this. I'm thinking of one from chapter 1. Arthur / O. When you see this, and this is the way it's presented in the book in every single chapter, it's called a combining form. But what you have to realize is that it's a word root. Arthur is the WR. The O is the combining vowel. Together, they make up the combining form. So Arthur / O is labeled a combining form in your book. You can even go to, if you look at page 59 in your book, that's chapter 3, you're going to see the listing of the words under word parts, and it says combining forms. Anter / O, and it gives you the definition, front. The next combining form is cod / O. The definition is tail or downward. So they're giving you a combining form. You have to understand that you are not going to label it as a combining form in every single medical term unless both a word root and a combining vowel are used. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you don't need the vowel, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So the major takeaway here that I want you to understand is that this right here, Arthur / O, you need to know that Arthur is a word root, the O part of it is your combining vowel, and together they make a combining form. Okay, that's your second. So we have word parts. The first one is a word root. The second is a combining vowel. Combining form isn't a word root. It's just like a subdivision, so we're not going to label it as such. The third word part is a prefix. Label it with a P, and it comes always at the beginning of a word. It may not be there. Every word doesn't have to have a prefix. It has to have a word root. It does not have to have a combining vowel. It does not have to have a prefix. It must have a suffix though. So you're always going to have a word root and you're always going to have a suffix. The suffix comes at the end of the word, and it's when you start defining it, you start with the suffix. All right, with your definition, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's labeled with an S. You absolutely cannot change it from what it is though. Okay, and I'll explain that in a second. So, 2 things. Most important part of the medical term is the word root. Think of the roots of a tree, it has to be there. The second is that there will always be a suffix. There may or may not be a combining vowel, and there may or may not be a prefix. So let's go on from there. I'm going to erase this. And we're going to elaborate a little bit on each of these. Okay. I want to go back to the book for a second. Page 59, and I want you to look at page 59 and page 60 in your book. And here is where you're going to see, on page 59, you see the orange box that says word parts, and it gives you combining forms. Now this I kind of already talked about, but I'm going to say it again because it bears repeating. In your box there, it says combining form. Enter /O. And then it gives you the definition. Front. Cod /O. And then it gives you the definition of that. Tail or downward. And so on and so forth. Now, what I want to make sure you understand, besides what I just said about even though they call this a combining form, which it is, combining, I'm missing some letters there, combining form, you have to remember, enter is a word root and O is your combining vowel. Together, they make a combining form. You don't always have to use this combining vowel though. And I'm going to show you that in a second when we turn the page. But I just want to make sure that you understand how they are given to you, because they're going to give it to you this way in every single chapter. They're going to introduce the terms. They're going to call the word root and the combining vowel a combining form. And then they're going to give you the definition. So as I said, enter /O, the definition of that means front. Cod /O, the definition of that means tail or downward. You can do either, you can memorize either or both as long as you have one of them, okay? Tail or downward. Now, you need to memorize. Remember I said memorizing is key to this whole course. You need to memorize that enter /O is a combining form and that it means front. Because now when we start getting into the exams, you're not going to have word banks that tells you what the definition of enter /O is. You have to recall it. This is where your flashcards come in. When you bought the book, there were flashcards attached to it by chapter. That's what you're memorizing. So you have to memorize, in fact, I'm going to put it up here, the entire page 59, everything in this box, you must memorize. All of these words, all your combining forms with their definitions. Not only do you have to memorize their definitions, you have to make sure you know they are a combining form, a word root and a combining vowel, so that you can label it that way. And if you turn to page 60, you're going to see there are 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes. You have to memorize the prefix, that it's bi and uni. You have to memorize that those are prefixes. They go at the beginning of words. And you have to memorize that bi means 2 and uni means 1. And then you have to do the same thing for the suffixes. You have 2 in this chapter, AD and IOR. You have to memorize not only what they mean, AD means toward, IOR means pertaining to, you have to memorize that they're both suffixes, so you know what part of the word you're talking about. All right? That's a lot of memorizing, I know, and it's going to get worse, so you have to start it now, okay? Now, talking about chapter 3, I want to point out, and this is why I do chapter 3 before chapter 2. You only had 2 suffixes presented right there. Let me put that. the two suffixes they gave you for chapter 3 was AD, which meant toward, and IOR, which means pertaining to. Again, now you saw that pertaining to in chapter 1, you had two other ones, IC and OUS. There's actually a lot of different pertaining tos. And yes, you do have to memorize them, but they all mean pertaining to. IOR, IC, OUS. AD means toward. Don't mix them up. Now, this is where I want to talk about whether you need a combining vowel when you make a term. So, going to the first word in this chapter, the first combining form was enter/o. Okay. The rule states when we use, or the rule that you should remember for do we use a combining vowel or do we not use a combining vowel is one simple rule. It has two different ways of being interpreted though. So whichever one you choose to remember, I don't care, as long as you get one of them. But it always refers to the suffix. Okay? If the suffix begins with a vowel or a consonant, this is going to determine if you use the combining vowel or not. So, if the suffix begins with a vowel, and remember, our vowels, there's only 5 of them. A, whoops, that's not an A, E, I, O, and U. Those are vowels. That's it. Everything else is a consonant. If the suffix begins with one of these letters, you do not use a combining vowel. No CV, no O, so you would only use the word root part of enter/o. You wouldn't use the O because your beginning suffix would begin with a vowel if it began with any one of these 5 letters. However, if the suffix you're putting on begins with a consonant, you do want to use the O. So it would be antero, whatever the suffix is, as long as the suffix began with a letter that wasn't A, E, I, O, or U. Okay? So, let's look at a couple for instances here. In this chapter, and only in chapter 3, the suffixes you learned, both of them begin with a vowel. This one begins with A, this one begins with I. So in this case, for this chapter, you're not going to have any combining vowels when you dissect the words, when you analyze them. And the reason is because both of these start with vowels. So if they start with a vowel, you are not going to use the combining vowel. So, a couple words out of this chapter. Let's do this. Anterior. And let's do caudad. Okay, so look at anterior. When you look at this word, you're looking at it and trying to determine where you're going to put the slashes. Find the word parts. When you look at the end of it, go find the suffix first. That's the easiest part. And you look back and you look at your suffixes, which you've memorized now, and you say, oh, IOR is a suffix. Okay, so I'm going to put a slash here because I know that IOR is a suffix. Now I go back and I learned antero is a word root plus a combining vowel, but there is no combining vowel because IOR, your suffix, starts with a vowel. So we're not going to use another vowel. So when I label this, and that's all I have to do, there's my slash. When I label it, I label anter is my word root, WR. IOR is my suffix with an S, and that's it. If I don't use a combining vowel, I don't have a combining form. So this is right, exactly the way it is. And when you write your definition, you always start with the suffix. So your definition would be, I'm going to write it down here, pertaining to, because IOR means pertaining to, the front, because anter means front. Pertaining to the front. The second word, caudad. Okay, same thing. You've memorized these, and you know that caud/o is a combining form for tail or downward. And you memorized that ad is a suffix meaning toward. So when you look at the word, look for your suffix. Oh yeah, okay, here it is, ad. I put my slash there. And then I look at it and I say, here's my suffix. Caud was a word root. That's all I have to write. There's no combining vowel because this started with a vowel, your suffix. So I have no combining form. And my definition for caudad, starting with the suffix, which means toward. Toward. Caud was tail. Toward the tail. And that's my analyzing and defining. All right? Now, I want to stress that you can never, ever change a suffix in order to try and put in a combining vowel. So let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, I'm going to go back for this. I'm going to go back to chapter 1, some words on chapter 1. And the two words I'm going to use are osteopathy we'll start with this one. All right, osteopathy. So when we analyze this and define it, the first thing we do is put slashes in. Look for your suffix. Your suffix was pathy. Put a line in front of it. All right, so we have the suffix. Now you're looking at osti, and you learned this, osti/o, as a combining form. Osti was the word root, and o was the combining vowel. And whenever you have a word root and the combining vowel, you're going to underline it and say you have a combining form. Combining vowel equals combining form. If you don't have a combining vowel, you don't have a combining form. Label pathy with your S. And then when you go to define it, you start with the suffix. Pathy is disease. Osti/o meant bone. Disease of the bone. Now let's do a word that doesn't have a combining vowel. Let's use the same root, osteitis. You learned itis was a suffix meaning inflammation. So that's where your slash goes. I don't want it to look like it's going through there. Okay. Itis is your suffix. Label it. Osti/o means bone, but we don't need the o this time. We don't need a combining vowel. Why? Because our suffix starts with a vowel. If it starts with a, e, I, o, or u, we don't use this. So all we need here is the word root part of it. Word root, suffix, done. Definition, start with the suffix. Itis means inflammation. Make sure when you spell inflammation, you notice it has two M's. Inflammation, oste means bone. Inflammation of the bone. You could put a bone instead if you want. It doesn't matter. Or the, as long as you get the idea. Inflammation of the bone. All right, now let me do one that threw some people on that first chapter assignment. The word cytoid. In your word bank, you had cyto. Whoops. I want to put the slash in the right spot. That was your combining form for cell. Now it was labeled as a combining form. Your job is to remember, even though they didn't label it as such, a combining form means word root plus combining vowel gives you the combining form. And oid was listed as a suffix. Whoops. Resembling is what it meant. Now, putting slashes into this. Some people wrote this. They put a slash here. I'm just going to make this a little easier. And they put a slash here. Now, right off the bat, this cannot possibly be. If you call that a combining vowel, what is ID? You didn't learn anything that was ID. You learned IOD is a suffix meaning resembling. You cannot change this, ever. If this is what it is, if this is how you learn it, OID, then it has to stay OID over here. So I'm getting rid of this. Now, you have a suffix. OID is your suffix. That no longer, you can't think of that as a combining vowel. So if it's not a combining vowel and all you have is CYT, that means you have a word root. So cytoid is simply a word root with a suffix. Now, the other reason you can't think of that as a combining vowel, this is the suffix oid. Oid begins with an O. That's a vowel, so we're not going to use this O. So therefore, you only end up, again, with the word root and the suffix. And when you define it, start at the end. Oid means resembling. Resembling. Cyte was a cell. Resembling a cell. And that's it. Okay? That should clear up any questions you might have. Another really, really important couple of things for you to do. Do the examples, the exercises that are in your book. Every chapter has a ton of exercises that are labeled exercise 15, exercise 16, 22, whatever. Do them. And then there's answers in the back of the book. Check them afterwards, not before. Don't do it just by filling in blanks. You're never going to memorize anything that way. But that way, at least you can check your answers and see what was wrong. And you could catch yourself like, oh, I put a combining vowel and there is no combining vowel. It'll show you why it's wrong. So it's really, really important to do those. But if you're doing it and you still can't get the hang of it, email me. Please email me. I will meet with you on a Google Meet and we'll settle it once and for all. But don't let this go. If you get into the next chapter, chapter 2, when we get to it, has a ton of words that you need to memorize, and you have to fully understand what a word root and a suffix and a combining form all are. And if you're confused going into chapter 2, it's not going to go well. So you need to contact me if you're at all unsure of this. And you'll be able to tell once you take exam for chapter 3. Okay? And if you still have problems, please get in touch with me. I hope this clears it up. And again, go print off the sheet from week 2 that says how to analyze and define a medical term.